We've all heard we should step out of our comfort zone, but what if instead we looked at it from the lens of capacity? In today's show, how to increase your capacity zone. This is Coaching for Leaders, episode 218.
Produced by Innovate Learning, maximizing human potential.
Greetings to you from Orange County, California. This is Coaching for Leaders, and I'm your host, Dave Stachowiak. Leaders aren't born, they're made. And this weekly show will give you access to the best thinkers, resources, and actions to develop your leadership skills. And if you're listening for the first time, welcome. So glad you've joined today because I have a returning guest to the show today. My friend Beth Buelow was on the show back on episode 201 on how introverts make great leaders. And Beth has really become an expert out there in the entrepreneurial space of helping those who have a preference for introversion to lead more effectively in entrepreneurship and in small business. I was telling Beth recently that episode 201 was one of the most downloaded episodes this year, so I know it resonates as well with many of you. And the reason I'm so glad to have Beth back is she has just launched her new book, The Introvert Entrepreneur, and she's also the host of the Introvert Entrepreneur podcast. And she's here today to actually tackle a topic that I know will be helpful to those of us who have a preference for introversion, but in addition to that, will be helpful to us more broadly on how we increase our capacity in the things that we want to do in the workplace each day and also in our personal lives. Beth, welcome back to the show. I'm just thrilled to talk to you.
It is a true pleasure to be here. Thank you, Dave.
Well, let's start with the analogy you use in the book about carnival games, which when I was reading, I just completely resonated with me because when I remember, Beth, when I was a kid, our church had a annual picnic, and they always got all the games together, and different people in the church would volunteer to run games for the kids. And I well remember going one year and my dad and I walking past this one game, and it was the best way I could describe it. They were really brightly colored walking sticks. You could win these walking sticks, and I'm looking back, they must have been like, $1 a piece or something, but
right. But it was so valuable then.
It was. And I remember my dad said, just a very passing comment, I'm sure he doesn't even remember saying it to me. Oh, son, you could win me one of those walking sticks, and when I get old, I could use it. And I remember, I don't know how old I was, 6 or 7 or 8 years old, and I just remember thinking like, oh my gosh, I have to win this walking stick for my dad, so when he's old, he has something that he can use.
You don't want to be responsible for him stumbling around.
I know. And I spent the rest of that afternoon at that booth trying to win the walking stick. And unfortunately, the story does not have a happy ending. I utterly failed. And so anytime I see a story about carnival games, I just feel like that experience always comes right back. And so I thought it was interesting that you used the analogy of carnival games in your book on thinking about how we handle capacity. And I was wondering if you could share how you framed this and looked at this.
Yeah. Well, you learned a lesson at an early age, I'm guessing, and I could turn the tables on you and say, when you think back on that, like, what did you learn about, like you said, it didn't have a happy ending. What did you learn about failure? What did you learn about exerting an effort to get something and feeling motivated to continue to try and to win for someone else? Like, it was for you, but it was for your father, right?
Yeah. Well, what's interesting is that I do remember it so clearly because it didn't happen much in my childhood. I was pretty good at school. I had a lot of successes. So when something didn't work for me, I remembered it clearly, and it burned into my mind. And so it's interesting you asked that, Beth, because if I look back now, if I could change my childhood, which I had a wonderful childhood, but if there was something I would change, I would actually have wanted to have more failures at some points in childhood to have become more comfortable with it than I am currently today. And I'm getting more comfortable with it, but I think if I had had more earlier on, I bet I would have moved faster on some things professionally in my life.
Yeah, yeah. And that's one of the things I talk about in the book is accelerating failure, like fail often and fail fast. And clearly, even though you had that experience and looking back, you wish you had more, it sounds like you still, were able to be resilient. It didn't knock you down, it didn't kill you. You were able to move on. And that's one of the things, like in the book, I talk about a whack-a-mole. You get this visual of taking some sort of hammer, other kind of carnival device and trying to, whack moles as they're popping up through holes. And we can get very, fixated on it. And when we're doing it, we don't expect to win necessarily. Like we almost expect to fail because we know the game is kind of rigged and that it's probably not going to go our way, at least not at first. But we keep trying and we don't let it defeat us. And I think that, when we learn those lessons about, okay, it's easy to learn that lesson when you're doing something that is inconsequential, like trying to win a teddy bear or a walking stick. We accept those kinds of failures, even though we get very, don't we get emotional about it? We get adrenaline flowing and excitement going. So we're invested, but we also bounce back.
Yeah.
We learn to realize, okay, it didn't happen, so that's not the end of the world. But then we don't always carry that lesson forward into our real, quote unquote, real lives. And especially when we're in business and in leadership positions, we will see failure as something that is, we focus more on our failures than we do our successes. It's kind of, it's been human nature. And even though there's been so much talk about, focusing on your strengths, counting your wins, counting your blessings and all of that, it's still, especially I think amongst high achievers, so easy to get sucked into thinking about where you missed whacking the mole instead of, that one time, instead of maybe the 5 times that you did it successfully before.
Yeah, it's so true. And and I just think back to how many times on this show, Beth, I've had people on who have been very successful doing something and talk about the importance of failure, accelerating failure. I remember having Rich Sheridan on the phone, who was the author of Joy Inc. a couple of years ago, who talked a lot about how they built a workplace people love. And one of their mantras in their company is fail faster, that we recognize failure is inevitable. And it's an important part of the learning process and the professional development process, and even the process of developing things for customers. And so let's put it out there and let's fail faster. And yet, for so many of us, we're taught by society or organizations that failure is such a bad thing, even though we expect it in things like carnival games, and we know that's just the way the world works. When we actually get out into the world, and then all of a sudden we have a failure in our professional lives or in our business or organization, everyone goes, oh my goodness, what did you do? Why did you make that big mistake? And failure is really data. It's data on what didn't work so you can move on to the next thing. By the way, I'm saying this, but one of the shifts.
Are you still learning it yourself?
Oh, for sure. Because you make the point in your book, which I love, is so it's one thing to know that. It's a whole nother thing to then take different action and to actually trust that that's really the right path for you.
Exactly. And one of the things that I've learned about failure, I think I've almost come to the conclusion that it doesn't have to exist. Like failure, saying I failed or it was wrong, it's a judgment that we put on it. It's very subjective. Like you said, it's data. And there's a great phrase, I'm open to outcome, not attached. And when you think about that in relationship to failing, when you quote unquote fail, it's usually because if you really get real with yourself and reflect on it, it's because you were attached to a particular outcome. You were attached to something happening in a particular way. And when it doesn't happen that way, then it gets labeled a failure or bad or wrong. If you're able to if you're able to approach your goals, your business, your capacity in your job, all of those things with a little, it's almost unrealistic to say no attachment, but with less attachment, you'll find yourself being much more compassionate and being able to see those failures, quote unquote, as data, as opposed to indictments on who you are and what you're capable of.
Well, that's one of the things I wanted us to even get in a little more on, because for those of us, and you have a preference for introversion. I know you've said many times on your podcast, and you and I talking together, and I do as well. And I know there are many in our audience who do. And we all do this, but I think in particular, those of us who have a preference for introversion, we tend to get in our comfort zones, and there's certain ways we like to do things, and we don't think as quickly as maybe those who are more extroverted to do things a little differently or increase our capacity. And one of the things that I think was neat that you did in the book is you make a distinction between a comfort zone and a capacity zone. And I was wondering if you could share that distinction with us and why that distinction is helpful for you and for others you've worked with.
Yeah. I'd like to start by saying that when I talk about comfort zone, especially in the context of introverts, I think of it as a very positive place. I feel like the messages, just like with failure that we get from society around comfort zones are very shaming. Like nothing good ever comes out of your comfort zone, and variations on that. Like if you're not living on the edge, you're taking up too much space. And, those can be very motivating statements, but they also can be very shaming and discounting of a place that can be very nurturing and very recharging, especially for an introvert. And so, especially in entrepreneurship and in leadership, we're always being told, get out of your comfort zone, get out of it. And I feel like there's also space to be in your comfort zone, because that's where you can shut out all of the overstimulation. You can shut out the things that are distracting or stressing you, and be able to recharge so that you can go out. And where the capacity zone comes in is, it's like, instead of thinking of getting outside of your comfort zone, think of your comfort zone as having maybe another, ring around it, or a layer that's actually your capacity zone. And you start in your comfort zone and you kind of gear up for that stretching, and you get your resources all together. And then you can stretch out a little bit, and you can increase the capacity zone, what you are capable of doing. And when you do that, when you come at it, perhaps from that home base of a comfort zone, when you stretch out into and you're increasing your capacity zone, it's a little less stressful. You're a little bit more grounded, and you have a little bit more confidence, perhaps, and energy to do those sorts of things. And while it might still be, a little bit scary, it's good to be scared every once in a while, right?
It is.
But if we can ground that in that sort of, that home base of the comfort zone, and stretching out and increasing our capacity zone, that what we're capable of will continue to grow and grow and grow. And what is in your comfort zone will continue to grow and grow and grow. Because I don't know about you, but I don't want every new activity to always be like on the edge and uncomfortable every time, all the time. My hope is that I do it enough, and that I get comfortable enough that it does start to become part of my comfort zone repertoire, I guess. Like right now, this is within my comfort zone. And that's, that is something that wasn't maybe true a few years ago, but now it is, and I really enjoy it. So
same here. Yeah, no, I love the way you frame that, because I think that there is this expectation sometimes that, especially those of us who are in leadership roles in business and in organizations, that we always have to be pushing the edge, that we always have to make ourselves uncomfortable. And you and I even had this conversation, I think back in episode 201, we were talking about Dale Carnegie, because sometimes there's the belief that, when people attend courses with Dale Carnegie and the work I do at Dale Carnegie, that, we're trying that they need to change, or they need to become more extroverted. Right. And our message has always been very much of, be who you are, just increase your capacity and the tools that you have for different situations. And I really like that approach, because then it's not just getting better, but it's also getting better and enjoying your work and enjoying what you're doing. That's one of the principles I've used with coaching for leaders, is to enjoy it and to have fun with it, and not just always be pushing for the next thing, but to enjoy the journey and to have fun with it. And I think that your way of thinking about this, of we don't have to shame this comfort zone, which let's just look at it as a different place than increasing your capacity.
Yeah, absolutely. And it is that place where especially for introverts, it's that place where you can be quiet, where you can reflect and you can hear your own voice and be able to kind of filter out the other voices. So for me, that comfort zone is what makes the capacity zone and what makes stepping out into the unknown possible.
All right. So I know there's probably a few people listening who are saying, okay, I buy into that. That makes sense. I'd like to be more like that. When you're working with clients, and I know you often are coaching people, Beth, what is it that you do that you find or suggest that you find helps people to take that first step of, okay, now what could I do that would increase my capacity zone?
Usually it's one simple step. Like often somebody will take something like, I need to start a blog, right? And I have one client who doesn't have a blog. She's been thinking about it. She loves to write, but she's kind of paralyzed with this idea of a blog because she has in her mind the people who have written, 1,000 blog posts over the years or have so many followers or that sort of thing. So it's a really uncomfortable and a huge stretch for her to think about just even starting. So we talk about we create a comfort zone of boundaries and structure and parameters. So in her case, I said, okay, here's the challenge. You're going to take no more than 30 minutes. It's going to be no more than 300 words. You'll do, and putting a box around it, if you will, to break out of that seeing everything as so overwhelming and big. So there's that comfort zone of like, oh, I can do that. I can do it for 15 minutes or 30 minutes. I can write 300 words and I can put it out there and see what happens. And so that's kind of how we were able to break through that initial barrier of it's too big, it's too much, and say, okay, so let's take it back into something that that is familiar and again, that is comfortable.
So it's setting a lower bar almost initially, at least, not long term. I almost think of it like if you were watching someone learn how to do the high jump, is you would set the bar. You wouldn't set the bar at the world record level at the beginning. You would set it low and you'd gradually get better at that. And then you'd set it higher. So funny, Beth, because the conversation we had last week on the show about habit setting, almost the exact same strategy was changing a new habit is to do something very small at the beginning, get a win there, get your confidence up, start a progress toward being sustainable with it. And then you gradually start to move the bar up as time goes on. So it's almost the exact same. It's like again and again, this advice keeps coming of like, the way to change behavior is not to massively try to change your whole life or business at once. It's to identify one or two things and to make a small shift and then to continue to move the bar as you achieve success there.
Exactly. And Warren Buffett, famous introvert entrepreneur, one of my favorite quotes from him, and I'm not going to say it exactly, so this is a paraphrase, but he says something like, I would rather find 7 1-foot bars to jump over than 1 7-foot bar. You get that idea, basically, that, it's a series of smaller steps. I would rather have 10 different wins than one big one that, you don't know what's going to happen. So, I love what you said about, creating wins for yourself, because that's the other thing that can discourage us. We still might break it down into small pieces, but we haven't broken them down realistically enough that we're setting ourselves up for success. So I think that's the question to ask is like, what's going to set me up for success? And it's success according to you, not according to what somebody else might be looking at it and saying, well, that's not any big deal. If it's a big deal to you, then that is all that's required.
That's great. And it's the same strategy Dale Carnegie's used for 100 years in classes, is giving people those small wins and building their confidence level and then doing great things with it. And it's as much as I am always inspired by the organizations and leaders that do set those big stretch goals and can do big things with it, more often than not, I found that the organizations that do that really frustrate and challenge employees. And I worked for an organization at one point where we never hit the goal because it was so high that it just wasn't achievable in any realm of reality. And so people just didn't really take the goals seriously after a while because they're like, well, we know the goal is going to be, 40% more than we've ever done. So it's just not, it's not even grounded in reality of feeling like that's an achievable objective for us.
Hmm. And that gets to another part about the comfort zone and capacity and the pressure to set these unrealistic goals or to have super high expectations. And if you're not going for the gold, then, it's basically summed up in that expression, go big or go back to bed. We embrace that and we say, yes, that's right. And I'm sort of like, why can't I go big and go back to bed? Why does it have to be an either or?
Oh, said by a true introvert. Bonnie will love that when she hears that.
Exactly.
So, okay, speaking of going big and going back to bed, so let's get real personal here for a minute. So it is, we're recording this on November 6th. The show is actually going to air a little bit after this. But you launched your book this week. So this has been a big project you've been working on. By the way, the book is fabulous. I really hope that I have not read the whole book, but I've read a portion of it, and I really hope people will go check it out. Some of the really big names out there in the field of the introversion space, like Susan Cain, for example, have endorsed the book. If you identify as an introvert and you're a leader in any capacity in an organization, I would really encourage you to check it out. So here's the thing, Beth, though, I'm curious about is you are the kind of person that, I would imagine there's a lot of expectation on authors to go big and to be out there and to be on media. And you have done a lot of that in the last few weeks and month or so. What have you done in your own work and how you're approaching this to increase your capacity zone?
Well, on book launch day, I took a nap.
Did you really?
I did.
That's awesome.
From 10:30 to 11:30. It wasn't even noon.
That is awesome.
I had such an awful night's sleep, just a little bit of pre-launch day anxiety. But so I did go big and then I went back to bed. But, it's been about... And this is going to sound, I hope this doesn't sound negative, but in some ways, it's like recognizing, acknowledging, and accepting limitations. And when I say that, I don't mean it to sound like I'm saying, well, I'm limited or I can only do so much. But I also know that my energy is something of a finite resource. It always has to be, it is renewable. It's a renewable resource. But on a daily basis, and especially when I am putting myself out there in such a way, it's something that I have to kind of guard a little bit fiercely and say, I don't care if somebody would say, I can't believe you took a nap on your launch day. That's what I had to do. And so that's how I've been able to take care of myself throughout this whole process. I'm not immune to, feeling like, oh, I have to be everywhere. I have to, do everything. I have to do all the things that they say I should and, follow all the instructions to a T. That's kind of my recovering type A personality that looks at all of that and feels some disappointment if I didn't do everything that I could. But then there's this other part of me that says, something though, you do the best you can. And you do it true to who you are. Like it has to be in integrity. It has to be in alignment. And if, splattering my message all over the universe is not in alignment, then that's not what I'm going to do. And it might work for someone else, but if it doesn't work for me, then it's not going to work. So I've just been able to find, different that do fit personality, do fit my style and my message, and have tried to embrace those and give myself credit for where I am showing up and how I'm showing up. I think that's the other thing that's really important, because as we started out this conversation, it's so easy to focus on the shortcomings and the things you didn't do. And we forget to give ourselves credit for the things large and small, day in and day out, that we consistently do to put ourselves out there, get our message out, make a difference in people's lives. Yeah, that's a very rambling answer to your question, but it's been an interesting journey of self-discovery. I will definitely say that. If you ever want to have every button pushed that you can possibly think of, publish a book.
Yeah, I bet. And it strikes me as a very authentic answer too. And one of the things I heard you say there is that part of the way you improve your capacity zone is you also honor your comfort zone, is you recognize what you can do and what you can't do. And you're fine of saying, hey, I am going to take a nap on launch day. And hey, I'm not going to stay up all night for 4 nights in a row of trying to prepare this. And I'm going to leverage other people. I know you have other people on your team involved. And so part of the way you improve your capacity zone is you identify what your comfort zone is and when you need to be there in order to do that.
Exactly. When you need to honor it, and then to remember to celebrate every time that you are stretching that zone and stretching that capacity zone, and like I said, giving yourself credit.
Oh, interesting, because celebration is not something that I tend to do well, and I think that sometimes a lot of us probably set aside the importance of that. That's one of those things I recognize the importance of, Beth, but I definitely don't do in action as much. Why is that important from your perspective? And then what do you do to celebrate when the time is right to have something to celebrate?
Besides take a nap.
Besides take a nap, yeah. That would be Bonnie's answer. If Bonnie was here, that's the answer she would have.
Excellent. I like her. It's important because it doesn't matter if you're running a business, if you're a leader in a business, it's a marathon, not a sprint. And we need to be able to recognize the small wins that we have along the way. A perfect example that I found really affirming and inspiring was a nonprofit organization that in their development office where they were raising money, every time a new gift came in, they would ring a bell and everybody would hear that and then they would applaud and go back to work. And it didn't matter if it was a $5 check in the mail or a $5 million grant that they had just received. They celebrated every gift. And I think it's good for us to, consider that and think, how can I celebrate these different milestones, these different achievements, large and small, the $5, the 5 million, it doesn't matter. Because the more we do that, then the more I think we're bringing gratitude into our work and the more sustainable we will be, because it can feel like a slog. If you're always, day in, day out, and you're not acknowledging those good things and feeling gratitude for them, it can be, a huge weight. Like you, it's something I talk about, and I'm not always good at doing it. I think about it. And sometimes I think even carving out just a few minutes to think about, okay, where did I start and where am I now? And wow, I really appreciate that. Another way I celebrate wins is I text my friend and I'll say, hey, this just happened. And her heart has like this over the top enthusiasm, get out of here, kind of response.
Awesome.
And she helps me to celebrate.
Oh, cool.
I can always count on her for that enthusiasm. So it's great if you have somebody in your life that you can turn to that way.
It's so easy to turn our attention to the things that don't work. And I think most of us do that pretty naturally. We don't need to be reminded. Thank you very much. But
exactly.
we definitely struggle with taking the time to stop and enjoy the things that are happening great in our business and in our life, and finding people who support us with that. And I just love that you have a friend who does that for you. And I know you do a good job of doing that for other people too. So I just think it's a great message for us and how we improve our capacity and how that will help us to continue to lead more effectively and have the energy and the enthusiasm to do that in a real, authentic way.
Yeah.
Well, Beth, I am so grateful for you taking the time to be here today in the midst of your launch week of your book. And for those who, I know you have some additional things that go along with the book in addition to just the book itself that people get. And I was wondering if maybe you could share a little bit of that before we go.
Yeah, I'm actually developing an online course that's going to go, and I'm sorry to call it a course because that sounds really dry, doesn't it? Actually, what we're calling it is it's a spin on the subtitle, and it's called Amplify Your Strengths Learning Lab. And it's an online cohort of fellow introvert entrepreneurs. And the best way to describe it is it's book group meets mastermind group. So we're going to take a deep dive into the book and see how we can apply it to our businesses. So
cool.
That's one offering that'll be coming up in January. And otherwise, throughout the book, there are different notations that tell you where you can go online for some different activities or worksheets, for instance, a values identification exercise and things like that. So when you see something like that in the book, please visit online and you'll get more resources.
Great. Well, the best way to track down Beth is to go to the introvertentrepreneur.com. She also has a huge following on Facebook. You got about 30,000 people that are part of your community, Beth, and are doing great things as far as helping to support the community you've built and helping introverts and entrepreneurs to do great things. So congratulations on that. I'm just really excited for all the work you've done out there. And I hope people will go check out the book and use it as a resource, especially those of us who really identify with wanting to do this in a way that's really authentic to who we are.
Yeah, fabulous. Thank you so much, Dave.
Beth Buelow is the author of the new book, just launched, The Introvert Entrepreneur, and is also the host of the Introvert Entrepreneur podcast. Thanks, Beth.
Thanks, Dave.
I've had the privilege of getting to know Beth pretty well over the last few months, and I really value the work that she's doing out there. If you, like me, tend to be more introverted or maybe work with someone closely who is, and you're leading a business or organization, I really would encourage you to check out this new book, The Introvert Entrepreneur, and also to check out her podcast by the same name. I listen to it often, and I think you'll find that her work's really helpful out there in the world for you. And if you have comments or questions about anything we talked about on today's show, or maybe you just have a comment or question in general about leadership that you'd like us to tackle for one of the next Q&A shows, the next one coming up is episode 221, go over to coachingforleaders.com/feedback. And unlike most months, we actually still have some question spots available for the show coming up in December. So get your questions in now if you've got one that you'd like us to consider for the show. Again, coachingforleaders.com/feedback. I always give preference to people who submit questions by audio, which you can do on that site. You can even listen to it before you submit it, but you can also, there's information there on how to submit it by writing as well. And if you're not already subscribed to the show, it airs every Monday. You can subscribe to it on wherever you're listening to this, or on iTunes or Stitcher. And before I let you go, take a moment, please, to join my weekly leadership guide. It comes to your email box on Wednesday and includes an article from me each week on the best articles, podcasts, videos, ideas, resources that I know will help you between the shows, and it also includes an overview and a link to the full weekly show notes so you can get all the resources mentioned each week. So if you listen on the go like I do, it will help you in staying current on what's being mentioned on the show. And when you join the Leadership Guide, you will get instant access to my Reader's Guide that lists the 10 leadership books that will help you get better results from others, with brief summaries from me on the value of each one of those books. And if you read just one of those books this year, maybe even over the holidays, it'll really get you set up for success starting in 2016. And it will almost certainly get you thinking about not only reading one of those other 9 books, but you'll hear many references to great leadership books in any of those books. So if you'd like to get access to that, coachingforleaders.com/subscribe is the way to do that, and that'll keep you connected with the show and everything that's going on in the Coaching for Leaders community as well. Hey, have a great week, and I look forward to talking with you next Monday. Take care.